Welcome to the House of Destiny. We have a very special, dear guest with us today. And I just wanted you to be in on one of our little chats and conversations. This is Dr. Mark Sharona. He's a dear friend of ours, of our family, and was a very, very dear friend of my father's. For those of you who don't already know, I know many of you already know who he is. And so we decided to sit down and have a little talk today, and we wanted you to be in on this conversation. And I hope that you enjoy it and can get something out of it. And so do I.
Donna, I want to take a little time and unpack some things with you, if that's okay, for the sake of the family of House of Destiny.
Yes.
When Dad was ill, and when Dad came to those final days and moments when he transitioned to heaven, there were some significant moments for you that were nothing short of divine impartational encounters that impacted your awareness, impacted your understanding of not just your dad, but what he was bequeathing to you. And in the world of psychology, firsthand experience by the observer is called phenomenology. And for the sake of the House of Destiny, I would like to unpack what it was like for you phenomenologically, first person, to experience what you experienced. And here's my reason. I am persuaded that Dad's gifting is in you. And I'm persuaded that there were things that happened in his passing that unmistakably were God's intent for you. I don't think the House of Destiny knows everything that happened, but I'd like you to begin to unpack. So let's start where you want to start, and then I'd like to interact with you and help everybody experience the experience from your eyes.
When Dad was sick, and a lot of the audience watching right now, a lot of the members of the House of Destiny were watching during that process. I had many encounters that I shared with them at the time. My interpretation of those encounters didn't turn out the way that I expected, because in the moment I would see nothing but my dad's restoration, recovery. I would not allow myself to see that he would die. Naturally, that's, as his child,
Sure.
what I would do. And I prayed and prayed and prayed more than I've ever, I wouldn't say more than I've ever prayed, but in a way that I've never prayed, at a level of desperation that I'd never prayed before, where I was literally on my face before God. And there were specific things that I saw that in hindsight, I now understand what they meant. But at the time, I was trying to unwrap it. I even had we did a broadcast the one day where I sat behind Dad's piano and I talked to all of you, to all of the audience, and just started going over things that had happened and trying to understand it with them, because I felt like they're a part of us. They'd been with us through all of this. And so I wanted to have a conversation with them. And I did get a huge response. I mean, I had a stack of emails like this. One thing that I saw, which was probably the most profound, intense experience I had, was I was praying for him. This was shortly after the first stroke. I was praying for him, and I saw him in a dark place, and he was suddenly lifted up like this, wrapped around, and began to spin. And I knew it was God who had him. I just knew that. I didn't see anything there. I didn't see a person. I didn't see a figure. I just knew that it was God. And he had him tight like this and was spinning, and they were spinning up together, and my father's face was in awe like this, and God was breathing into him. And at the time, I interpreted that as a healing, that God would heal him. But now I understand that it was God taking him out of that dark place, which was the physical suffering he was in. And I feel like there's more to the breathing into him part as well, because I think it applies to us now. There's levels of it, like I'm seeing levels of it, like him personally, the things he prophesied for this nation, for the nations of the earth. And as I've gone over prophecies of him, he refers to that a lot, that God is going to breathe into you. God is going to breathe into this generation. And so I'm starting to understand what took an instant for me to see had so many layers and so much depth to it that it's taken my mind some time to understand what was imparted into my spirit for my mind to then process.
And it's profoundly accurate what you're saying on a number of levels. First and foremost, when we look at, for example, the transition of Elijah to heaven, it is a whirlwind that catches him up. So that the whirlwind is the reverse cyclone that pulls everything into its orbit and transports Elijah into the heavenly arena. And in the process, his spirit, his breath, is promised to the one who asks for a double portion of his breath. And interesting, when we talk about double portion, literally in the Hebrew, it's double mouthful.
Oh, I didn't know
So
that.
it's a double mouth. So the firstborn historically got the double portion. Well, that was twice as much. So for example, they got the best leg of the lamb. Everybody else got the rest, but they got the double portion. So it's a double mouthful. Well, the breath of God in every transition, in seasons and epochs of the move of God, God always leaves a legacy behind through his servants for the next generation to grow on. So when you saw that personally, while on the one hand that relates to everyone, on the other hand you saw that. This was Danae experiencing this firsthand, that dad was being caught up. Who was the only one that saw Elijah caught up? Elisha. So he had to be in close proximity. And who got the double mouthful?
Elisha did.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit about when you hear me say that, how you process that.
It takes me back to the moment that I had with my dad alone before he passed.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Because we knew that it was coming that night, and each of his children had time alone with him. And so when it was my turn, I had that mantle, you know, the mantle. Then that is the one that I carried with me and prayed over that whole time. It is filthy with makeup from me weeping over it. I wrapped it around his arm. I covered him with it. I left it with him sometimes. And I knew the moment that we were in. And even then, I still was pushing it away. Mm-hmm. But in that moment when I was alone with him, it wasn't even like there was a thought process of, okay, you got to do this and this and this and this and this. I just was doing things. And I grabbed the mantle and I wrapped it around my arm and I wrapped it around mine. And I held his arm like this. And I said, okay, I'll take it. I sort of submitted because I had been resisting this whole time. I'd been resisting that because what I wanted was my dad to live. And so in that moment, I sort of said, okay, if this is what's going to happen, then I will take it. This is my responsibility. And when my dad spoke about the mantle, he wore it as a symbol of his responsibility. And I understood that. And so I took it. And I wrapped it around his arm and my arm. And then after that, I lifted up his hands and prayed in the Spirit for him, because he could no longer do that. Because at that point in time, he couldn't move any of his body anymore. And knowing how much my father loved to pray and actually pray in the Spirit, I felt that I needed to do that for him before he went. And so I lifted his arms up and just prayed in the Spirit for him. And I said, God, I'm doing this for him because he can't do it for himself. And I don't know why I did that either.
What did Elisha ask for when Elijah said, what shall I do for you before I'm taken from you?
He asked for the mantle. He asked for the double portion
Of
his anointing,
his spirit.
of his Spirit.
He said, I want a double portion of your Spirit. He didn't say, I want a double portion for myself. He said, I want a double portion of your Spirit. So there was something in Elisha that said, what God gave you isn't finished yet. Mm-hmm. And for your namesake, I want the double portion of your Spirit so that people will recognize that when I operate in what has been entrusted to me, they'll recognize that this is your legacy. And so when the moment comes, he cries out, my Father, the chariots of Israel and the horsemen thereof. And he tears his own coat to put on the other mantle. So the grief makes room for the new mantle. And the key was, here's how you know you get the mantle. If you see when I'm taken from you. If you see me when I'm taken from you. And it's literally if you see when I'm taken from you. So here's where I want you to go, because I am persuaded, as is Mom and as are many of us, and it's the reason we laid hands on you and took that mantle with you and Mom and wrapped you in it and conferred what God already did and affirmed it, that you do have your dad's mantle. I am powerfully persuaded that everything that Dad carried, you now carry as the heir apparent. But at that moment when Dad passed, let's go back to first-hand experience. What happened? What did you experience? What was going on? Talk to House of Destiny about it.
Well, we as a family were around the bed. Now, an extraordinary thing is that in 2011, he gave me a disc. And on that disc, he had recorded a song, which he later turned into another song. But in that initial recording, he said he was praying. And he heard specific things that he knew he had to replicate. And when I went back and listened to this afterwards, it sounded like what it must have sounded like to him in that hospital room. And one thing that was grieving me so much was that he couldn't speak, so he couldn't have last words. And on this disc, he sings, but distorts his voice. And he sings, I know you are there, I know you're with me. And I hear a voice calling to me. And when I found that afterwards, it was a great comfort to me, because I felt like he gave me his last words in 2011. Mm-hmm. Because he gave me that disc and he said, you keep this. And I went through computers and lost stuff on my iTunes, but that track stayed there and is still there. So in that moment, we were surrounding him. Because in that track, he sang with a distorted voice, as they surround me, I know you're there, I know you're with me. And it's just beautiful. And then there's him singing that. I don't remember all the words right now, but then it breaks into this beautiful, him playing this beautiful music like a release. I'll let you hear it. You're going to want to hear it. But in that moment, we were all there, his children around him, and I was at his right side, and I was holding his hand, and I believed to the last beat of his heart that he was going to live. My faith was his heart's going to keep beating. We're going to see a miracle. I wouldn't, all those other things that I'd seen before. I mean, there was even a number of times where I was praying or I was just driving in my car, and it's very difficult for me to describe this, but what I saw was, it was almost like layers, and at the very bottom was something very painful, and I would push it away. And I didn't know what it was. I don't know how to describe some of these things, but it was like layers and then pain at the bottom. And I constantly would get that feeling during the course of his illness, and I would push it away, push it away. So even there at his bedside, when I was holding his hand, I believed his heart's going to keep beating. We're going to see this miracle. He's going to, this is my dad. He's made it through all this stuff. He's a fighter. It's going to be fine. His heart's going to keep beating. And I kept putting my hand on his chest to feel his heart. And when it stopped, I jumped up. I think he stopped breathing first, and then his heart stopped. And when his heart stopped, I jumped up in that moment, and I grabbed his face, and I kissed his face. And I said, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. But I saw, it was like a download that, again, I would have to process later to understand how much was put into me, because I felt him go through me.
Breathing into you.
And it made me completely lose my fear of death. I have no fear of death. I know where he went. And all I can describe to you is that it is glorious. And it's not something I saw. It's not anything. It's something I felt that was so good. It was like, for a moment, I felt where he was going, and it was really good. And I have, from that moment forth, absolutely no fear of death. Before that, I was afraid of death. I have no fear of death now, because in that moment, I knew that I knew where he was going is really, really good. And I didn't feel bad for him at all. It was for us left behind who are sad over it, and the loss of him, which has been great loss for our family and for our team.
Sure. So here's my question. All of that happened, and you were the one that experienced that, and you happened to be the firstborn.
Yeah.
So when I say, Danae, do you recognize that Dad's legacy, while it is shared with your brothers and sisters, that he gave you the double mouthful?
Also, there was a few days before he passed away. It was when he was still conscious and aware, because he had pneumonia. And we were in the hospital, and my mom was on this side of him, and my aunt and uncle were on that side of him praying for him. And I was at his feet, and I was holding his feet. And I was crying and crying and praying in the spirit, and they were praying. And I looked up, and he was looking directly in my eyes and did not take his eyes off of me, and I kept my eyes on his eyes. And it was like he was saying something to me, or sharing something with me.
And what was it? What do you sense it was?
Like, you have to do this. Kind of thing.
Okay. And so now that we're moving forward, House of Destiny is moving forward, how can the House of Destiny family pray for Danae so that in full confidence she can do everything Dad has bequeathed her to do? How can they pray for you?
That I will find my own expression while keeping true to the legacy of what my father's, because I can't be Dad, I have to be me.
Sure.
And that's the difficulty, is that there's part of me that's Dad, there's part of me that's Mom, there's part of me that's my grandparents, there's traits in myself that I know what I am and what I can do, my measure of rule, my gifts and what they are. And where I am now is I'm trying to find my voice, but with the echo of his behind mine, if you understand what I mean.
And Elijah and Elisha had distinctly different purposes. And so what I want to say to the entire House of Destiny is to continue to keep Danae in prayer, because it is my conviction that in the coming months you are going to see the charisms, the gifts of the Spirit, the grace gifts of the Spirit that operated in Kim, operate in Danae in her own unique way, and that we are in a day, Danae, when the spirit of the age that we're fighting in the current culture is so in need of seeing the demonstration of the Holy Spirit and power, that because from a millennial perspective, I believe you're training in education, you're forming at the hand of God through Mom and Dad, and your preparation through the grief have adequately prepared you for where you're going. And so I want to say to the entire House of Destiny and to you, we believe in you because we believe in the God in you. And your greatest days are not only going to be seen by you, but the entire family is going to rejoice as you operate in your unique voice. And they're going to see the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. The spirit of Kim rests on Danae.
And you remember what I said at the memorial?
I do.
That's something else that I saw. I saw that because I saw it was like raining mantles, you know, and I think about the 7,000 in reserve. You remember?
They still need an Elisha, though.
And so that's why I'm encouraging, because you saw how my dad would send out
Absolutely.
mantles. He was sending them out because there's a generation that is prophetic, that is going to move, I think, in the prophetic in a more profound way than we've ever seen.
Absolutely.
Because Dad, when he prophesied about the Jesus movement, I've heard others speak about back when they first started, they would have to labor in prayer to receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. Now we very easily receive it. I think the same thing is happening in the prophetic, is that we're going to see a generation of people who will move to a higher level in the prophetic. So I think when I saw that rain of mantles, that I'm seeing that over a generation of people, you know, especially the people who have followed my dad for all these years, and people who have followed you. There's an impartation on this new generation, which I think it really needs. I'm very passionate about what is going on in the world right now. I'm watching the youth, particularly, and I see there's going to be a rebelling in an unusual way with the young people.
And my encouragement to the whole House of Destiny and to you is to tap into that, because they're going to take their cue from what you see. And